Have you ever landed in another country and immediately started hunting for Wi-Fi or got hit with devastating roaming charges? Genuinely has happened to me. Came back from holiday and I was like, wait, no, I checked Google Maps for like 2 minutes. And they're like, here's a massive bill. Thank you so much. Well, look, today's sponsor, Saily, makes that whole mess irrelevant. It's a global eSIM app with affordable data plans in over 190 countries. And once it's installed, you don't need to mess with new SIMs every time you cross a border. Whether you're traveling across Europe or just hopping between airports, your connection activates the moment you land. No shady kiosks, no random SIM cards, no, why did I get an $80 data charge? That's conservative. Their plans are solid, regional or global, and if your phone supports eSIMs, setup takes about 2 minutes. It's ridiculously simple. All you need to do is use the code SHADOWS at checkout to get 15% off your data plan. Just download the Saily app or go to saily.com/shadows. Use the code SHADOWS for 15% off. And now today's video. This hallucinogen is so potent it can keep you high for days on end. It's powerful, inexpensive, and surprisingly, in most places, it's totally legal. Known as Bromo DragonFLY, it puts other psychedelic drugs to shame. It's twice as strong as LSD, has stimulant effects similar to meth, and its popularity is rising across the global party scene. But where exactly did this ominous drug come from? How has it remained legal in so many areas for so long, and how have its effects led to cases of overdose, hospitalization, and even death? This could be the most powerful narcotic you've never heard of. Sure, it might be labeled as not for human consumption, but for those who do take it, they are in for a hell of a ride. So, what is this mystical Bromo DragonFLY, and why does it have a name that sounds like an Instagram-worthy jiu-jitsu gym? Well, it's a synthetic designer hallucinogenic drug, but what's that really mean? Synthetic means it was artificially created in a lab rather than being found in nature like wild mushrooms or certain cannabis species. A designer drug is engineered to replicate or intensify the effects of traditional illicit substances, either by boosting their potency or slightly altering their chemical structure to dodge legal regulation. Often these drugs have inconsistent ingredients and scant information regarding proper dosages and potential health risks because their molecular structure is constantly being tweaked to stay one step ahead of the law. As for hallucinogens, well, it's pretty obvious. They make you hallucinate, which some people find to be exciting. The chemical name of this synthetic designer hallucinogen isn't actually Dragonfly, that's just a nickname. Its full name is bromofluorobenzo this. I don't know. It's known as Dragonfly because its chemical structure resembles a dragonfly as closely as a chemistry formula can. It has 2 wings, a head, and a long tail. The compound is designed to mimic the psychedelic effects of the 1970s hallucinogenic drug 2CB, which, as you can see here, shares a similar appearance and is available in both powder and pill form. However, Dragonfly also appears to exhibit stimulant and psychoactive effects similar to those of well-known drugs like LSD, amphetamine, methamphetamine, and MDMA. Like many drugs, Dragonfly has earned several nicknames, including Fly, ABDF, 2CB Fly, DOB Dragonfly, BDF, Placid, Spamfly, and B-Fly. Clarity, we'll refer to it as Dragonfly or Bromo DragonFly, as that's the most commonly used name. As far as recreational drugs go, Bromo DragonFly is relatively new, exceptionally potent, and downright terrifying. It was first synthesized in 1998 at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. It all happened in the lab of Professor David Nichols. The scientists there were researching the central nervous system, focusing on serotonin receptor activity and structure. Quick aside here, serotonin is the chemical your brain releases in response to certain stimuli, the so-called happiness chemical. During this period, they managed to create Bromo DragonFly, meaning this hallucinogenic drug was designed in a science lab with the idea of maximizing the serotonin response, just for funsies. Even today, there are absolutely 0 medical applications for Dragonfly. And trust me when we say that it is powerful. ED50 is a scientific metric that indicates the dose of a medication required to produce its intended pharmacological effects. Essentially, it measures how much of the substance is needed for a person to become highly intoxicated and start experiencing hallucinations. Researchers discovered that Dragonfly is approximately twice as potent as LSD. That's acid, the drug that makes you feel like you're going to another dimension. So it's essentially double its potency. Moreover, DragonFly lasts longer than almost any other substance, whether legal or illegal. A standard dose of Bromo DragonFly can keep a user high for up to 3 days, which is far too long for most people to safely manage. With its high potency and extended duration of action, the global spread of this hallucinogen raises pressing questions. How has it become so widespread despite its dangers? Why are governments struggling to control it? And where do users even obtain such a niche psychedelic? At some point, the formula of this hilariously potent chemical substance was leaked and rapidly spread around the globe. It was officially identified in 2008 amid a growing trend of drug abuse discovered during the Psychonaut web mapping project's internet monitoring activities. However, we have reason to believe that DragonFly began buzzing onto the recreational drug scene in the early 2000s, which aligns well with the year that it was originally created. I mean, a hallucinogen that makes you high for 3 days sounds like an early 2000 festival goer's dream. Since then, it has remained a niche, evolving, and elusive substance linked to numerous overdoses and even some fatalities. We weren't kidding when we said this stuff was strong. Its popularity is growing, initially seen mostly in northern European nations like Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. It's now increasingly used throughout Europe and the USA among any particularly vibrant party or rave scene. The onset of its effects is rather slow, and as a party drug, it often ends up being mixed with various other substances, both legal and illegal. Talking marijuana, cocaine, prescription meds, alcohol, LSD, ketamine, amphetamines, and even other legal highs. Needless to say, combining all of these with a drug that lasts 3 days, not really a brilliant idea. Bromo DragonFly is available in 3 main forms: powder, liquid, and blotter paper. The powdered form can be snorted, smoked, ingested, or even taken rectally, if that's your speed. However, snorting the crystals appears to produce the most intense hallucinations and the worst health-related side effects, and get to those later. The liquid form is typically injected directly into the bloodstream via a vein, but like rectal administration, its use is both highly uncommon due to the practical challenges and extremely dangerous. It's very easy to overdose doing it this way. One of the most common methods of administration is oral, either by taking it in a solution or by using blotter paper. The drug is dissolved in a liquid that is then absorbed onto blotter paper. Once dried, the paper is cut into individual squares known as tabs, which are then taken by placing them under the tongue or swallowing them. You may have heard the term a tab of acid in reference to LSD, and this is the same process that's going on here. It is also likely the safest method of administration, as the dosages are more accurate and the chances of overdose are lower. Additionally, some blotter papers are sometimes made into art to increase their appeal, which is nice. And on top of all of that, it's not only potent, convenient, and flexible, it's also pretty cheap, at least by party drug standards. A single gram of Bromo DragonFly can set you back over $400, and I think you might be saying, "Oh, Simon, you sound as much. $400, you said it was cheap." Well, that's because the typical dose is less than a single milligram. A gram of this stuff would absolutely kill you. It might even kill an elephant. A single dose of blotter paper can cost anywhere between $14 and $42, and considering how much people tend to spend on booze at raves and festivals, that isn't a huge amount for several days' worth of feeling like you're living inside a kaleidoscope. Of course, it can be even cheaper depending on supply, demand, and the strength of the dose. Generally speaking, you can purchase DragonFly in 2 batches. The European batch, which is stronger, and the American batch, which is weaker. We can only speculate about why the potency is divided along geographical lines, aside from assuming the Europeans may have a higher tolerance for narcotics, a notion that might be obvious to anyone who's visited Scotland. In the Nordic nations, as well as Romania, the potent effects of DragonFly became a major concern for authorities, as its use led to numerous fatalities. These problems ultimately resulted in an outright ban on DragonFly in these countries, making them the only regions to have taken such a definitive regulatory stance on the hallucinogen. The reason for this is that enforcing restrictions is difficult. In many parts of the world, DragonFly is regarded as a legal high, meaning it isn't specifically prohibited for people to possess, supply, or consume. Even if it were banned, scientists could simply alter the formula by 0.1%, resulting in an entirely new substance to outlaw. The cycle doesn't end. It's a bit like changing George's name in Of Mice and Men to Phil, and then claiming that this creates an entirely new work of fiction from a legal standpoint. Lest we forget, DragonFly itself is a descendant of 2CB. a similar illegal compound with a slightly different structure. Even if you ban the entire 2CB family of drugs, like the UK's Psychoactive Substances Act of 2016 did by classifying them all as Class A drugs, there are still ways around this restriction. In the UK, these drugs are illegal to produce, supply, or import for human consumption. Those last two words, human consumption, are real important. People can simply stick a not for human consumption label on their DragonFLY, designated as plant food or something like that, and then import it without any problems. Just because it says not for human consumption, though, doesn't mean people are going to follow that guideline. They're going to do the opposite. They're going to take it. They know what they're doing. I mean, at least the UK attempted to do something about it. Most of Europe, as well as many states in the US, just don't outlaw it at all. Oklahoma, though, they've made it illegal. Well done, Oklahoma. And so this legal high, as it's known in many parts of the world, continues to exist in a legislative grey area. Although it isn't explicitly banned by name, it doesn't seem to be legal either. These grey areas lead people to use the substance under the false impression that it's safe. And as we're about to demonstrate, that notion is completely wrong. So, you already know where to find it, how much it costs, and that it packs a powerful punch. But what is it about Bromo DragonFLY that makes it so potent, highly sought after, and incredibly dangerous for its users? Well, first of all, let's talk a little about hallucinogens and what they actually do. When someone takes a hallucinogen, regardless of its form, it enters the bloodstream and eventually reaches the brain. Once there, it binds to your serotonin receptors, the very receptors responsible for releasing that happy chemical when you eat a chocolate bar or watch one of my videos. You're welcome. This binding process overwhelms the receptors, causing both serotonin and dopamine receptors to repeatedly fire. As a result, the brain's interpretation of everyday sensory input is temporarily altered. In scientific terms, this phenomenon is often described as tripping balls. These hallucinations can manifest in various ways, mainly creating false perceptions of your core senses. When hallucinating, you might see, hear, smell, taste, or touch things that aren't really there. For instance, you might feel as though someone is in the same room when nobody's present. You might sense that you're floating or flying, or even experience an entirely alternative reality. DragonFLY produces effects similar to those. There are many, but common ones include hallucinatory experiences like visual and auditory distortions, a feeling of connection or belonging with other realities, a sense of peace and well-being, emotional stimulation, altered perceptions of space and time, euphoria, increased dissociative thinking, prolonged sexual pleasure, and encounters with other entities. As noted earlier, these effects don't just last for a couple of hours or a few minutes, they can persist for 2 to 3 days. By comparison, 2CB, the potent psychedelic upon which DragonFLY is based, typically lasts about 10 to 15 hours, which is still a lot. Now you might be thinking all of this sounds great, let's all take a DragonFLY and spend a long weekend meeting space Jesus, but not so fast. Despite its enticing allure, DragonFLY is catastrophically dangerous, and we strongly recommend that you don't take it. And there are several key reasons for this caution. Reason number 1. You have no idea what you're taking. Bromo DragonFLY is a synthetic drug that looks like every other synthetic substance you've ever seen, typically an ominous powder, pill, or liquid. Unless you're a chemist with a PhD and a fully equipped lab, you really have no clue what's inside. And because it's a designer drug, its formula can be altered constantly, which can lead to adverse effects and even more confusion about its ingredients. And look, I hate to sound like a narc, but if you don't know what something is, you probably shouldn't put it in your body. Drugs like DragonFLY and other synthetic hallucinogens are sometimes mislabeled or marketed as something else, usually LSD. Someone expecting a tab of acid at a festival to enjoy pretty colors might instead find themselves in the ICU. Reason number 2, it is ridiculously potent. We mentioned that. A typical dose reported by users ranges from 200 to 800 micrograms, less than a pinch of salt, making it extremely difficult to measure accurately with imprecise tools like your kitchen scales. Consequently, many users unintentionally take too much and overdose. And trust me, you don't want to overdose on a drug that keeps you high for 3 days normally. What's even worse is that the onset of Bromo DragonFLY usually takes 6 to 8 hours to fully kick in. During that time, an impatient person may decide they got a dud and take more, or perhaps even something else, only to have the eventual overwhelming effects hit them even harder. As a result, some users describe Bromo DragonFLY's effects as being strapped to a rocket, extremely high, no way to get off. The high has been said to last too long and leave you drained, which in our books, bit of an understatement. Reason number 3, is that it's extraordinarily bad for your health. Like all psychoactive substances, there is the possibility of addiction and subsequent withdrawal, even though scientists report that dependence on DragonFly is rare. Despite its reputation for being less addictive, people can and still do develop an addiction, especially since it's designed to flood your brain with serotonin and dopamine, two things that you really like. Beyond just the risk of addiction, taking DragonFly can be severely dangerous for your body. We're about to list every single medical complication that has been reported in at least a handful of cases involving DragonFly, and it's a long list, bear with us. Agitation, anxiety, blood vessel constriction in the extremities, confusion, delusions, diarrhea, dilated pupils, extreme fever, flashbacks, headaches, heart problems, high blood pressure, insomnia, kidney failure, liver failure, memory problems, muscle tension, muscle breakdown, nausea, paranoia, restlessness, respiratory problems, seizures, sweating, twitching, and death. Woo-wee! And that is without even mentioning that there are probably additional undocumented effects since DragonFly has not yet been fully studied and its formula is constantly changing. Do you still want to meet Space Jesus? I didn't think so. But don't just take my word for it. Several media stories recounted how people impulsively took Bromo DragonFly only to regret it later. One man from the UK described his life-threatening experience saying, "I threw up and then inhaled the contents of my stomach and my lung collapsed. As the ambulance arrived, I had another fit and my heart stopped. They brought me back in the ambulance and then my heart failed again as we reached the hospital." His dose cost him £5. He stated that since his near-death experience, he has continued to suffer from severe flashbacks due to the trauma inflicted on both his body and mind. Some users weren't so fortunate as to only experience near-fatal effects. The BBC reports that an 18-year-old died after taking DragonFly, having been promised a mellow hit similar to acid, but more enjoyable. In one reported case from Denmark, an 18-year-old woman died after consuming liquid Bromo DragonFly. Her autopsy revealed a swelling of the lungs and brain, an enlarged spleen, stomach irritation, and poor blood flow to the kidneys. In another case from 2008, a patient in a Swedish hospital died after suffering convulsions, breathing problems, liver and kidney failure, and on top of that, losing several of her fingers and toes. So what we're saying is that people ultimately end up hospitalized by Bromo DragonFly for a variety of reasons. Every person's different, with unique brain chemistry that reacts in its own way to certain substances, and an adverse reaction, whether mental or physical, can cause serious harm that may be irreversible. You know how some people avoid smoking weed because it can induce high levels of paranoia? Now imagine someone having a similar negative reaction to something as dangerous as Bromo DragonFly. Despite its intriguing and potent effects, the risks of ending up as just another case in the hospital, or even the morgue, is simply too great. But for now, there hasn't been any forward motion on whether DragonFly is going to get banned. As mentioned, it's restricted in the Nordic nations due to its popularity and abuse there, which forced authorities to intervene. However, in other countries it remains effectively legal as long as it's labelled as plant food and not for human consumption, those magical 4 words again. It occupies this legal grey area, leading some to believe that it isn't directly outlawed so it can't be harmful. A dangerous assumption that absolutely costs lives. People can still easily find it and its ingredients on the internet. Until further research is conducted to fully understand DragonFly's effects, it will continue to fly under the radar of authorities. Regardless of your opinions on drug prohibition, DragonFly must be thoroughly researched and understood by the scientific community, not a bored chemist in his garage with too much spare time to accurately assess its dangers. Gotta say, I'm with Nancy Reagan on this one. Thanks for watching.
Just say no.